Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Kathy. I don't know if you can hear me. Okay, a little bit further back. Can you hear me in the back of the room? Okay? My name is Dan Muroff, candidate for the 7th Congressional District. I live in White Marsh, Montgomery County. And before I talk about economic equality, economic justice, I just want to give you about a 90-second primer on who I am. Some of you are familiar faces to me and others are not, so I think it's important to have a little context. I'm originally from Havertown, born and raised, Delaware County, and product of public schools, was raised in a union household. And after that, I went on to Drexel University, law school in Chicago, worked in the environmental sector for a couple of years. And then I went to Washington, worked on Capitol Hill. I served as chief of staff to a member of Congress for most of that time, for 7 years. The only candidate running with substantive Hill experience. Returned to the Philadelphia area, and I have dedicated a lot of my time and my energy to civic causes. I'm the most recent past president of Ceasefire PA. A lot of you folks know the organization. Our statewide gun violence prevention organization. And I'm also a recent past president of Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania, which is our state chapter of the League of Conservation Voters, because I believe environmental stewardship starts at home. And so I speak of these things because I share my background with you, because everything...
Back up.
Back up? Thank you, Abu. Everything ties into economic justice and economic development, economic justice, economic equality. You know, we are watching today an administration that is trying to find a way to sabotage the Affordable Care Act. Every step along the way since this bill was put into law, it has all been about tearing it down. I'm for protecting 23 million people who are threatened to be taken off the health care rolls. I'm for a $15 minimum wage and more, and pegged to inflation going forward. I'm for equal pay for equal work. I believe that economic justice and economic equality ties into... I'm having a little bit of difficulty with my distance to the microphone. Sorry about that. I believe that economic justice and economic equality tie into economic development, something I've dedicated much of my life to as well. When I worked on Capitol Hill, I staffed the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee on behalf of my boss, a progressive member of Congress from Massachusetts, Jim McGovern, and Mike Capuano, both of them. And one of the things that we were working with was investing in progressive transportation priorities, transit, not just roads and bridges, but most importantly, we were investing, because investing in infrastructure creates jobs. And the best way to have economic justice and economic equality is to have jobs. You know, our country has been going in the wrong direction. In the last 30 years, we've seen a lot of people leave the labor force, leaving the union labor force. And a lot of times you hear people say, well, that's because all those jobs have gone overseas. Well, that's not really true. It's true in part. And I was raised in a union household. I'm a committed union supporter. But about 80% of the jobs that were lost in the last 30 years were lost to automation. And if you think the last 30 years gave you concern, and you see what we have today because people are scared, because people are worried about their futures, people are worried about what they're going to have when they retire, if they can retire. Imagine what the next 30 years present for us. See, I think our job in government has to be to get ahead of the problems. Artificial intelligence, it's not a terrible thing. It's actually great that some things are much easier to do. Automation. But imagine 2.3 million truck drivers. What are they going to do? We already see it in our day-to-day. Taxi cab drivers. I take Easy Pass on the turnpike. Every one of these improvements results in job losses, and we as legislators, we as leaders, have a fiduciary responsibility not just to react to today's challenges, but to be on the vanguard of tomorrow's. And I'm committed to doing that. I'm committed, if elected, to giving specific attention to artificial intelligence and the potential disruption, the certain disruption of the jobs of today and what we're facing. So economic justice and economic equality also have to do with environmental justice. When I chose the law school I went to in Chicago because it offered an environmental certificate with the degree. I was proud of the work that I did in the environmental sector. But I can tell you that people who live in some neighborhoods, they just can't afford to get out of them, and they live around pollution. The amount of lead that is in old homes, and people have no way out. Growing children are susceptible to brain damage from eating lead chip paint. Homes built before 1976 have the great potential for being deadly for little children. Government has a responsibility. Government has a fiduciary to not just make things easy for those who can afford it, but to make things better for those who can't. I believe that. I'm committed to that. And I'll close with this. Over the last few years, we've seen this crescendo of demagoguery and fear-mongering. And it's troubling to all of us, and we're all on the right side here, right? We're on the righteous side of this divide. But that's not enough. We need to, in this case, in this instance, for the 7th Congressional District, Pat Meehan has been silent. Pat Meehan has not taken a leadership role to stand up to Donald Trump and those who are using the pulpit to divide us. So what I am looking forward to doing is hearing a little bit from you, from your questions. I thank you for the opportunity to hear from me. And I'll be around, because I wasn't here earlier, I'll be around towards the end so that I can say hello and meet some people that I didn't have an opportunity to do because I got here a little bit late. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan. That was great. We have one question for Dan at this point. It's a little bit off topic again, but it's how would you encourage Congress to vote against their own interests and enact campaign finance reform? So campaign finance reform, which is a huge issue. We have March on Harrisburg here about campaign finance reform too. So if you don't know anything about that, please, they'll be speaking a little bit later for a couple of minutes. But Dan, for you, campaign finance reform, how are you going to get it done?
Well, thank you for the question. I'll first start off with a little bit of history about this congressional district. One of the people I'm very proud to be running in a district that Bob Edgar once served. I don't know if any of you remember Bob Edgar I think he was elected in 1970, late 1970s. And he was committed, he dedicated himself at Common Cause to addressing the abuses in campaign finance, among other things, after he left Congress. one of the challenges that I think that people have with campaign finance is there are those of us who believe that the system is flawed, and we want to reform it. We'll vote the right way, but the establishment needs more people. And I would say that probably most of us who are running here, progressive-minded people, agree that these changes need to be made. Whether we are talking about getting rid of the rulings that had happened. Forgive me. Some of the rulings that Citizens United. Thank you so much for reminding me. For Citizens United. Yeah, I mean, we need to have a constitutional amendment. Unfortunately, these barriers are tall. So I'm committed to taking the charge, and I'm committed to fighting for the causes that I think matter. How to get people who want the status quo? I think the goal is to just get people elected who want something other than the status quo. I'm committed to that change.
Do we have time for one more question? Okay. All right.
All right, one more question for Dan, and I'm making an executive decision here, but I'm going to use a question that was we asked Molly because I think it is a good question, and that is, what is your plan to promote and to be a proud progressive and to support a progressive agenda? So, media, what have you? What are you going to be out there doing to really show that progressives matter?
I think the best way to show that it matters to me, progressive values, progressive causes, is to look back at my history. You know, I worked on Capitol Hill, as I said, and I served for two very progressive members of the Progressive Caucus. I served as chief of staff to one of them for most of those 7 years. I was president of Ceasefire PA. I was president of Conservation Voters. I was president of my community association. I was a Democratic committee person for 14 years. I have committed my life to progressive causes. If there is any indication, anything that you can point to, how a person is going to act in their future is how they've acted in the past. So I'm proud about my credentials. I'm proud about what I've done. And that's how I know that I'll stand up for progressive causes.
All right, thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. That's wonderful. Thank you so much.